Here's Gilgeous-Alexander. McCollum staying with him. Spins, gets inside. Left-handed off the glass. Oh, what a sweet move.
Giddy, tough spot. Backdoor. What a pass. What a play. And J-Dub picks the pocket of Trae Young. He'll take it himself.
This is Udart. You're listening to the Uncontested.
What is up, and welcome to the Uncontested podcast, coming to you live Wednesday, June 5th. So we are officially 3 weeks away from the NBA draft. I'm your host for the evening, Jacob Niffen, who now looks a lot better with a light on. I've got Taylor Peterson with me tonight.
Hey, Boomer Sooner. Pretty impressive from the softball team. Has been fun to follow along. Has been something nice to keep me entertained while we wait for the finals to start up as well.
We have fresh from Europe, Nick Crane.
I am back, baby.
How many Italian words did you say while you were in Italy, Nick?
Not very many. I didn't have power for the entire week leading up to the trip, and that was like I was planning on like learning some words and doing some research, and no chance for any of that. So I went in pretty blind. Everyone spoke English. I didn't need to anyways. It was all good.
That's right. The world language, baby. We are glad to have Nick back. But how was Europe? How was Adidas Euro Camp?
It was good. Makes you realize how much damn talent's out there and how many of these kids, like there's almost 100 players and 5% of them will make it to the league, and they're all super, super talented. It's insane. Like, I know we always like to say this guy sucks, that guy sucks in the NBA, but to get there is pretty remarkable. Just puts it in perspective.
Definitely. Well, we're glad you had a good time, but we're also glad you're back.
I haven't potted in a long time.
I know, it feels like forever.
I want to pick your brain and hear a bunch of stories and things, but I'll let Jacob get into the fun details.
Before we start tonight, I want to let you guys know that we are brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network and the best fast casual food in Oklahoma City, Dave's Hot Chicken and Spark OKC. Stay tuned in the coming weeks for news about our live stream. I was about to say live watch party. Not a live watch party, a live stream on the internet of the NBA draft night. I think we're just going to do the first round because the second round isn't that exciting, and it starts at like 3 p.m.
Exactly.
So it'd be very hard for us to do the second round. But so stay tuned in the coming weeks for that. We're also going to have some draft guests on, do a lot of draft coverage coming up. But tonight is all about NBA wings. If you joined us Sunday, we talked about the Thunder pursuing a big man this summer with their cap space, with all the money they have, with all the assets they have to go out and get a big man. We discussed the pros and cons of what adding a big to this lineup would look like. And then we talked about some specific names. So naturally, the next installment is the wings. So tonight we're going to talk about the pros and the cons and our thoughts of adding another wing to this team, an established wing to this team. We're going to go through a list of possible names that could be targets. And we're going to fire off some wild cards, some of our favorite possible wings that the Thunder could get as well. Gentlemen, let's start here first, though. And I'm interested to see where this conversation goes. Should the Thunder target a wing this summer? What are the pros and cons of doing so? I feel like we could get into a lot of pros and cons with a big. I don't know what they will look like with the wing, but let's kind of examine this from all angles, go 360 degrees all the way around this thing. Nick, you haven't potted in a while, so you get the floor first.
Okay.
You can choose a pro, or let's start with the cons of adding an established NBA wing to this team.
A con could be taking minutes from players that you think could be the established wing in a few years. I think Gordon Hayward is a great example of that. I think with established wings, depending on how old they are and their contract and how they fit, like it is kind of risky. I think I have a lot more pros, but if I had to give a con, it would be just like Gordon Hayward 2.0, where you try it, it doesn't work, it ends up being minutes from other guys that you probably would have been better off with.
Nick, for the listeners, and Jacob, you can chime in here as well. We're already getting some comments like longtime listener David Skelton, we don't need a wing. There's already some comments like, well, if you get a wing, you can get a big as well still. And then like when we did Sunday's podcast and we're talking about some of the bigs, we have people like throwing out some wing kind of names. I think it'd be important if we define what we're considering to be a wing kind of player and a big.
A big is a center in the NBA. It's probably going to be a guy with their back to the basket. Guy who plays, when we say big, we're talking about a guy who plays majority of his minutes at the 5. When we say wing, we're saying somebody who is more versatile, switchy, perimeter oriented. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, there's fours, quote unquote, in this league that are more bigs, and there's fours that are more wings. I think there's big guards that are probably more wings than they are off-ball guards. It does blend, to everyone's point in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we get flexible with it. Like there's going to be some guys that you'd say, is he really a wing, or is he more of like Jalen Williams is actually a point guard that is maybe more of an off-ball guard that actually plays in the wing. It's all, I mean, in the modern NBA, it's tough to really say what is what, but I think the archetype that we're talking about is players that are like Gordon Hayward, Aaron Wiggins, like that type of player.
Yes. Yes. More cons on adding a wing. Nick mentioned like taking minutes away from other guys. That kind of leads into where mine was as well, Nick. If you bring in an established NBA wing, they got to get minutes. And those minutes were played by somebody last year. Maybe a lot of those minutes are Gordon Hayward minutes, and that's fine. What if it's Aaron Wiggins minutes? What if it's Isaiah Joe minutes? What if you never give Ousmane Dieng the chance to spread his wings because you bring in an established wing? That part gets interesting. I think what goes hand in hand with that is shot attempts. I think we all three think that Shea, Chet, and Dub should take the most shots on this team. Certain wings you could bring in are going to take more shots. And there's only X amount of basketball shots in a game. So balancing that. And then you just think about the culture of this team and the culture that they've built over time. A lot of the guys on this team were drafted and brought in at a very young age and brought up in that culture. Bringing somebody established and introducing them into this culture can have a change. It can force a change. Things will not be the same, right? Everything is always changing. The culture is always changing, but you've kind of established a baseline here. Can bringing in somebody disrupt that culture? Maybe it's a good test for the culture. Hey, we feel like we've got a good culture. Now let's bring somebody in and see if they can adapt to it. Don't think that worked with Gordon Hayward. Maybe it works with somebody else.
And we saw it work with like a Nerlens Noel back during the Thunder 1.0 iteration. Technically, I guess it was after KD. But that's certainly a good point as well.
Who is not a wing for the listeners.
Yeah, not a wing.
Yeah, Taylor's mentioning more bringing in somebody to test the culture.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
Correct.
Hey,
you all.
As far as I know, Nerlens ate 0 hot dogs while in Oklahoma City. So
at least not on the bench or in uniform. So
I will say
we got
the
that
hot
going.
dogs that they serve in media dining at halftime where he got those are actually pretty gas. Not gonna lie. I don't blame the guy.
I like it. You all mentioned, especially Nick, you mentioned the minutes, and I also had Jacob Akon is just taking potentially, I think that's key, potentially taking away possessions from specifically Chet and Dub. We know Shea's going to get his, but Chet and Dub still have so much runway for development. You don't really want the ball out of their hands any more than it necessarily has to be. And so when you're thinking about a wing archetype like we defined earlier, there is the potential that those shot attempts and even some on-ball creation that could take away from the development of Dub and Chet. And the more they have the ball in their hands, the more dividends I think that will pay for this iteration of this Thunder team moving forward. Another con that I don't think we really have touched on is a big issue that every national NBA member, media member, and really all the fandom wants to talk about after the playoffs. It's the rebounding woes. That's why we started with bigs, right, on Sunday. But again, the archetype of player we're talking about isn't always a great rebounding type of player. You're more likely to find that in a big. And so that's something to keep an eye on as well. Can you find the right wing that fits the style play and also can still go and grab those rebounds? Like Josh Giddey played wing for the Thunder this season. And he's probably a better rebounder as a wing, even if he isn't truly a wing. Maybe that doesn't play to his strengths, but probably a better rebounding wing than other wings that are potentially available on the market. So just something else to monitor as well.
And I think that if you get a big or you get a wing, you're probably not addressing every single issue. If you could get a wing who is a competitive guy, who has good size, who can rebound, who can play next to Chet guard down low, who can hit an outside shot, who can attack a closeout and make a play with the ball in his hands and keep the ball moving. That's what all 30 teams want, right? Now we're getting in the conversation of like a Kevin Durant. You know, one guy isn't going to solve all the problems.
Yep.
And so Taylor, I think you use the rebounding as an example, but I think just across the board, you can't rely on bringing in one guy to fix everything.
That was my final con that I had, is that if you find the right archetype of a wing, I keep saying archetype, if you find the right fit for this team via a wing player, every single team in the league wants that kind of player. So it's going to be extremely hard to find. You're likely giving up, some other areas on the ball and off the ball defensively if you go and target that kind of player. It's not going to be the perfect Kevin Durant or Lauri Markkanen or all these names that people want to throw out. Mikal Bridges.
Exactly. Any more cons for this team to add a wing? Can you guys think of anything else?
No, I'd love to go pros and talk a lot about the pros because I think I feel pretty strongly about wings.
The floor is yours, Nikolai.
Yeah, I'm loving all the comments in the chat about Italian Nick.
Yeah.
Holy.
I think I have a lot of thoughts. I think wings drive the league for a few reasons. For starters, wings are generally the most versatile players. The way that we're doing this series, you think about bigs, like they kind of play one, maybe two positions. Like if you're an undersized 5, really more of a 4, you're still a big, but you're kind of limited on what your role is on a floor. Guards, we generally think of like point guards, off-ball guards, combo guards. They play 2 positions, sometimes 1 if you're a pure point guard. Wings, like that's the versatility of the NBA. The engine of the NBA being versatile is wings. Generally, wings can play upwards of 3 positions, like 2, 3, 4. For that reason, I think a veteran wing, would fit Oklahoma City very, very well because this is a team that'll play 4 guards and a big, or 3 guards and a forward and a big. Like the wing position is just something that I think Mark Daignault feels comfortable using, and I think drives versatility and flexibility in the NBA, which is what Oklahoma City is. If you get a wing that has size, that's great too. Like we think about the rebounding problem. If you want to fix that, it doesn't have to be a big. Like there's a lot of really good rebounding wings out there. There's also a lot of wings that can shoot threes and can also rebound. Like you're not going to fix every problem, but if you're going to fix the most problems with one person, it's probably going to be a wing.
I had a very similar pro, just that adding a wing versus a big most likely allows the Thunder to play their same style of basketball that they have been known to play, right? That they're, and I think like most likely it'd be a player who can push the ball in transition, more than likely someone who can play make, hypothetically, especially in comparison to a big, can space the floor and hopefully can defend on the perimeter. Big bonus obviously would be the rebounding, or if you can find a wing who can defend the rim as well alongside Chet. And I think, like you mentioned, Nick, you're more than likely to find players who fit the majority of those aspects in a wing rather than a big. You're never going to find a player who fits all of those things.
Taylor, Jacob, love to hear from both of you. If we only stuck to 3 categories, I think there's probably more like 4 or 5 categories of players we could do for this series. We're doing 3. We're doing guards, wings, and bigs. It's hard to say because we're not talking names yet. But would you
And
be
for the
most
record, we're doing bigs, wings, and dream scenario. We're skipping the guards.
No guards.
Oh, okay, great. Well, let's take big wings and guards in free agency via trade, draft. However, you're going to go plug holes in this team. If you only got one of those positions, what would you prefer Oklahoma City does without thinking about specific names? Like, are you most happy if Oklahoma City trades for an impact guard, an impact wing, or an impact big this summer?
Wing, it's not close.
Agreed.
Okay.
For the reasons
But
I laid
that's
out.
difficult because that's what everybody needs. And
Right, for sure.
everybody wants. You can never have enough of those guys.
For the reasons we're
And so
describing.
I think it's going to cost you.
Agreed.
And so I think then the interesting question, Nick, becomes the economics of it all. Would you rather the Thunder get an impact guard, wing, or big, considering cost benefit? I think you can get an impact big much cheaper than you can get an impact wing. So when you look at the cost benefit, what is more impactful for this team? I think that's a rabbit hole we do not need to dive down right now, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the analogy that Jacob's alluding to is like the phenomenon of you go to you buy a new house. You're going to buy furniture. You could buy the expensive couch that you really need for your house. You could buy a throw pillow for cheap that like makes the house look nice, but it's super cheap. Or you could buy like a centerpiece painting or a TV that like ties everything together for like that middle price. Like you need all three probably. Like what's going to fill the house the most? Like I think
just like Sam said, don't buy the paint before the framing's up.
I knew you were gonna
whatever
go there.
it was.
like you're going to have to pay more for the things that make the most impact. So it is like an economics game, but at some point, like if you go to the couch store to buy a couch and you end up buying a TV and a pillow, like yes, it'll help furnish your house, but that's not what you needed, and you spent less. But like, was it? You know what I mean? Like you gotta spend the money to play ball. Sam said it best: scared money don't make none. Like you have to go, especially with the capital you have to go spend it for the right guy. For the right guy.
Using the same
For sure.
analogy, you're moving into a new home, and presumably you have an older couch. Maybe that could suffice, or maybe has potential and could work better in the new home. And then you can go and buy you can spend a little extra money on your throw pillow.
Yeah.
And so I think about when Jacob brought that up earlier, I thought about the different avenues of acquiring such a player. Or not even acquiring, maybe you have him on the team, right? So either internal development, drafting said player, if he's in this draft or an upcoming draft, or obviously like we're alluding to, trading for a player that's already in the league or acquiring them via free agency. And balancing all those things, kind of like Jacob alluded to, is what Presti's best at. That's why we're doing this podcast and are not in a front office somewhere. But finding that right balance of acquiring a player that meets the different needs that we already have discussed in our pros, while also taking into consideration what you already have and what you potentially could get down the line as well.
I'd like to welcome everybody back from the HGTV podcast, where we discuss home and home furnishings. No, I think you guys are right on the money with that. I mean, more
This is pretty funny.
Just don't rent your furniture. Agreed. I mean, the other pro is that is the place of most need for the team, right? If we're talking like a 6'8", 6'9" wing who can play the 4, that's what this team is missing when you look at the way they want to play and positionally what they have and what they need. They're missing a 6'8", 6'9", 210, 215 type of guy who can go out there and defend the 4 and can be switchy and can do all these different things. So, I mean, to me, it's a pretty simple thing of you go get what you need.
Agreed. And kind of to that point, my last pro, believe it or not, it's very brief before we get into some specific names and potential targets, but a wing likely brings additional scoring on the floor, which opens the floor for our star players. And that is something that we really saw them struggle with there in the playoffs. And that's something that's kind of stuck with me as we head into the offseason.
I like it. Nick, any more from you?
No, I think there's more pros and cons. And I think that based on reports that we're hearing in the Twitterverse, wings seem to be a position that Presty's very much looking at.
In the Twitterverse.
And the Twitter, which is normally like, we don't hear much about OKC. This off season, it feels like there's a lot about OKC out there, which is not Oklahoma City leaking. It's other teams they're talking to, but they're definitely hitting the damn phones. That's for sure.
Yes. All right. How about we talk some names on the other side of this break? We will be right back. Do not go anywhere. And we are back. So we talked pros, we talked cons, we talked maybe why they would do a move for a wing. We are talking established wings, players that are already in the league. Also, had to get some water there for a second. I'm very parched. We're looking realistically. Okay. This is not the Kevin Durant podcast. This is not the Mikal Bridges podcast. If you want that, come back Sunday, because those names will probably come up in the dream trade scenarios. Tonight, a little more based in actuality and in possibility.
So let's go ahead and dive into Lauri Markkanen.
I've got 4 names. We will discuss. We'll talk the pros and cons of adding that player, what it would look like to acquire that player. And then we'll make a determination, a ranking. We'll decide some sort of ranking system. We'll rank our feelings on if they acquired that player at that cost. And then after we do those 4, we each get a wild card to bring up and chat about momentarily. Sound good? So we're going to hit 7 total guys. 7. There we go. 7 wings.
Love it.
Wing number 1 has been rumored to OKC recently via former Oklahoma City Thunder beat writer Darnell Mayberry. We are talking current Chicago Bull forward Patrick Williams. Let me give you guys some statistics on Patrick Williams before we dive into how he would look on this team. Pat Will is 6'7", 215 pounds. He's got about a 7-foot wingspan. His nicknames are The Paw and P-Dub. A P-Dub and a J-Dub would be dope. He was an all-rookie in the 2020-2021 season. This season, Patrick Williams averaged 10 points on 44% shooting. He shot 40% from 3 on 3.4 attempts a game. He was a 79% free throw shooter, averaged 4 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 1 steal, and nearly a block a game. When you look at his advanced statistics, defensive rebounding percentage, this season, 11.7. His career, 13%. Total rebound percent, this season, 8. His career, 8.4. I think it is important to give a little bit of context to the rebounding numbers. He does play on a team with Nikola Vucevic and Andre Drummond, who just like swallow rebounds. And so some of those numbers may be just related to the type of basketball environment he plays in. Pros and cons of Patrick Williams, gentlemen.
I'm gonna go cons. I'll get some cons. Health, big one.
Yes.
The guy, half of the seasons he's played in has not really played. For context, like he's right around 200 games played. I think he's like 215 in 4 years. Aaron Wiggins, not to compare the two players, it's like for reference, is over 203 seasons. So like a season less, damn the same amount of games. That's a guy that like gets DNP coaches' decisions at times. Like a guy that's not always playing games and in a season less has played more games than Pat Will. The other piece is the contract and how you could be hard capped if you sign and trade, if you want to get him On an offer sheet, you probably got to give a pretty big one. I like the idea of Patrick Williams. I'm starting with the cons. I think it's better to give the downside before we talk about all the awesome stuff he could provide. But there's some complications with getting him to OKC with financially, and then the injury stuff is like a little scary.
Let me touch on the contract for just a second, Taylor. Patrick Williams is a restricted free agent, which means this summer any team can make him a contract offer. If he accepts, the Bulls have the right to match that contract and keep him. So your two options of acquiring him are signing him to such a large contract that the Bulls would say, no, thank you, and lose that player for nothing. That's a little worrisome. You could give him like a 2-year balloon payment up until Chet and J-Dub are due their money. Just get him for 2 years. The other option is Pat Williams goes to Chicago and says, hey, I want to go to Oklahoma City. They're interested. Can you guys orchestrate a sign and trade? And the way a sign and trade works is the Bulls would sign him for the contract that the Thunder want him at, and then immediately trade him to Oklahoma City, and Oklahoma City would trade them something in return. If you do a sign and trade, like Nick mentioned, you get hard capped, which means there's a certain amount of money that you just cannot exceed. That hard cap number would be right at the first apron, which, let me see if I can get these numbers pulled up for you guys real quick. Salary cap 2024.
And while you're doing that, for reference, when you sign a guy to an offer sheet, opposing team has 2 days to match it, and that kind of like for that 48-hour period, if Oklahoma City were to throw him an offer, would like kind of be in no man's land for a bit, because if you've offered it, like you can't do other stuff. That said, if your only potential free agent target is Patrick Williams, I don't think you have to throw like so much money the Bulls don't match. You could throw like a borderline, like maybe they match, maybe they don't. We're comfortable with it if they don't, but we're not like overpaying. There's no one else in free agency we really want. Like we're fine being tied up for 2 days, and throw them a modest amount. Like, and if they match it, they match it. And then you got other guys you're looking at trading for.
For sure. So the Thunder have $33 million cap space this summer. That means they're $33 million below the salary cap. The salary cap is projected to be at $141. So that means the Thunder are on the hook right now for about $108. If they were to sign and trade, they would be hard capped at $178, because that is the first apron, meaning they could not exceed $178 million in spending. In all honesty, boys, I just don't think they're getting to that number anyways.
Agreed. It does hinder what they could potentially do come trade deadline time. But again, that would be something pretty big to happen for them to even flirt with that number. So I don't think that's necessarily a huge issue this season, but definitely something to monitor moving forward. Thankfully, the hard cap's only for 1 season. I just had some additional information, like in regards to his injury history. 43 games played this season due to a foot injury. He was shut down after he had to have a procedure on that foot. Only played 17 games in the 21-22 season. I think that was a wrist injury. So he certainly has that injury history, like you mentioned, Nick, which isn't ideal. I think
some more cons.
You were taking a drink, so I was.
Some more cons. Does not finish at the rim well. This season, I have the stat right here. This season, his field goal percent from 0 to 3 feet is 57%. His field goal percentage from 3 to 10 feet, so like that floater range, 32%. He does like to get to that 10 to 16 foot, like that free throw line midi pull up. He does shoot 49% on that. And then, like I said, this season, he was 40% from the 3-point line, which is awesome.
So he's like really good from 3, really good from mid range.
And
not so good.
It's a weird
you
one.
kind of hope he'd be better at the rim considering the size and the strength.
Yeah,
correct. And not much of a playmaker either is something that kind of stood out to me, especially when we're thinking about the construct of this current team.
Another note the reason that he's even a potential signee is because the Bulls wanted to bring him back this time last year, and he said he wanted the max contract. For like context on the number he's looking for, I think he may have come off that since, but him and
I'm sorry, I was distracted. You said he wanted a max?
He wanted the max contract.
So Darnell Mayberry's reporting is that the Bulls offered him around 16 a year.
Yeah.
And he declined.
And he wanted the max.
And well, the difference between a 16 mil and a max is a pretty large number.
It is. And that's why he did not sign the 16 mil.
Yeah. So I wonder if like 20 gets it done.
And that's where we get into the restricted free agency conundrum. Like, how much can you offer to make him intrigued and to make him sign an offer sheet? That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say there was something else that came out last year. So it was initially max, and then there was something else that came out that like he would take something in the 20s. I would argue that his recent season like decreased his value.
Agreed.
Given his age, we're gonna talk about pros. What's he, 22?
Yeah, we should probably hit pros and get through Pat Will so we can get to these other 6 guys.
He's 22,
he's
almost
younger
23.
than J-Dub.
Oh yeah, he is.
And is entering his 5th season in the league. For context, that's insane.
He's still got a lot of time in the league. Like, if they sign him for 20, I would probably not be sitting here on the pod saying like, "Oh my gosh, this team is now a championship contender." But I would be telling you, I probably think their 10-year window looks really promising if he can end up being the guy that he potentially could be. This is like the 4th overall pick.
We talked a lot about his offensive game for the cons. And one thing that sticks out to me when we're thinking about a wing, honestly, it's just somebody who hypothetically could replace Josh Giddey in that starting lineup, just based off the playoffs and some of the inefficiencies we saw from that starting group. And like something that really stood out to me and everybody else is the wide open shots that were available to Josh Giddey. So when I'm looking at these potential targets, I'm looking at the catch and shoot numbers and primarily from 3. And this past season, I almost said Pat Will. He is 39.8%, basically 40% from on catch and shoot threes, which is pretty critical when you're thinking about J-Dub, Shea, some of these other creators who can create those open opportunities for him. So again, very consistent from 3, which kind of surprises me when watching him at Florida State. He's developed a reliable 3-point shot. I'd like to see those attempts get up, though, especially with the Thunder, if they were to either acquire him via free agency or trade for him.
Yeah, I think the pros offensively are the jump shot, for sure. And I think there's a ton of pros defensively. Like when you look at this guy, they call him the paw because they call him like the mini Kawhi, the claw. He's a good defender. And he can guard up, he can guard down, great size. You want to talk about a disgusting defensive lineup. You throw him in at the 4 with those starters, Shea, Lou, Dub, P-Dub, and Chet. That is a disgusting defensive lineup who is going to get after you, who is going to get physical, and just honestly just going to try to beat the shit out of you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of exciting. If he can provide the defense and provide the spot up catch and shoot threes, that fills a lot of the gaps that you want.
Does the Devil's Advocate 6'7", not a great rebounder, how much more impactful is he than Aaron Wiggins next season?
That's a great question.
Like,
I agree.
If his name wasn't Patrick Williams, who's the former number 4 overall pick, are we hyping him because of his previous credentials and his name? You know what I mean? Not his name because it's Williams. His name because he's a high-profile former top 5 pick.
I think that's very fair. The youth is promising for him to be able to contribute at this level. Obviously, Wiggins is a little older and has more size. And I think could be more reliable from 3, given the limited sample size we've seen. But it's a really fair point. And that's kind of what I was getting to when we were going through our pros and cons of just adding a player of this caliber. Does that player already exist on this roster?
And like, given his scoring is reliant on the 3-point shot. If you get into a playoff series and he's not hitting his threes, what is he giving you offensively?
It's a fair point.
Yeah.
It's a fair point.
You sub in Aaron Wiggins.
All right. Let's wrap up the Patrick Williams discussion with two things. Number one, let's assume they cannot sign him outright in free agency and it is a sign and trade. What does the deal look like? My guess, it's a 3 or 4 year deal for, do we want to say 22 mil a year average?
I think it's a 490. So roughly, I mean, 23
Yeah.
and a half or whatever.
490.
Yep.
What does the exchange and the sign and trade look like? What is the Thunder giving up? Is it a first round pick? And that's it?
Tough.
Probably. I mean, give him 12.
It's not
Give
going
him
to be a
12.
Josh Giddey kind of trade. Like
Give him
people,
the
I think, in
Utah
the chats
pick
are thinking.
the next year. Give him the Miami pick next year. Are we assuming just one pick? And then you are eating up $23 million in cap space.
In a sign and trade, you don't really have a whole lot of leverage. It's like, give me something.
I would agree you don't have much leverage, but you have more leverage in restricted free agent sign and trade than you do in unrestricted. Because you could just say, fine, go get the offer sheet. We'll just match it and you're coming back.
Then I think Sam says, okay, then we'll trade for one of the other wings we're about to talk about.
Touche. All right, so let's say it's a pick. Let's say it's a decent first round pick and eating 22 mil of that cap space. Like it, love it, hate it. If that is the news that comes out on July 3rd, Nick.
Like it.
Taylor?
There's potential, but I don't think he's moving the needle necessarily as much as some of the other names we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I'd probably go like it as well. I'd talk myself into loving it pretty quickly.
Same.
But
I'm such a sucker. Okay, let's move on to our next guy. The next one is an interesting name. He is a Washington Wizard, former NBA champ. We are talking Kyle Kuzma. Let me give you some stats on Kyle. Kyle is about to be 29 years old. He was his birthday is one day after mine. He's July 24. I'm July 23. 6'9", 220. Kyle's stats this past season, he scored 22 points on 46% field goals, shot 34% from three on 6.5 attempts a game. He is a career 33% three-point shooter. He shot 77% from the free throw line, 6.6 rebounds, 4 assists, half a steal, and half a block a game. When you look at his advanced rebounding numbers, defensive rebounding, he was at 20% this last year. Total rebounding, he was at 11%. Kyle Kuzma's contract is next year at $23.5 million. The year after that at $21.5 million. The year after that, $19.5 million. So he goes for 3 more years, 23, 21, and 19.
The declining contract is obviously a pro. That's something that is really beneficial, especially with this team having this Thunder team having those having to sign these players to extensions coming up, like we've talked so much about. You mentioned the shooting splits, Jacob, and that's something that stood out to me kind of as a con. Like you said, only 33.7% from three on his career. He was 35% on catch and shoot threes this season. And just to put that into reference or to provide some context there, Josh was 34.4% on catch and shoot threes. So you're not getting a huge bump. He also has great size, but he's a pretty average rebounder. You got into his rebounding stats, only about 6 rebounds per game, which isn't awful, especially for a wing, but you're not getting that big rebound bump that I think this Thunder team needs. And he's never really been a great defensive player. I wouldn't call him a bad defensive player, but he's certainly not someone who's going to bring the defensive versatility like we talked about with the previous player and Patrick Williams. So those were kind of the cons that stood out to me originally.
To counter some of that, I wouldn't compare his 3-point shooting splits to Josh Giddey because he's not taking wide open take your time threes with no one guarding him. He's taking like, honestly, a lot of times bad threes or like contested or like step back. Just a different kind of 3-point shot.
Those were catch and shoot though, specifically.
Former players from California taking bad shots in Washington.
Oh, yeah.
Refuse to believe it.
I think that he's a guy that, excuse me, would shoot better percentages in Oklahoma City. I also know he's not getting 19 shots a game like he did last year. So I don't think like 22 points a game is likely. But I think if you look at his first year in Washington, he shot 14.2 times per game and averaged 17 points. That feels somewhat realistic, which is kind of like Josh's role now. I don't know. I think he's numbers wise similar to Josh in a lot of ways. Lower on assists, similar rebounds, similar points per shot. They take a different amount of shots right now. I don't think either are great on defense. They're similar size. I will say that Kyle is a much better self-creator. Like, that guy is capable of getting his shot anytime he wants to. It's a lot of times not a great shot, but he can make tough shots. I think that
was the pro I had.
really elevates Oklahoma City's offense, like really elevates in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of cons too, where it's like, does he also hinder some of the stuff they do by being Kyle Kuzma?
So I want to let Jacob
think there's
know
a cultural
that was
fit.
my counter.
Yeah, I don't think there's a huge cultural issue there as far as bringing him into the Thunder culture. He is a guy who's won a title before. I worry about bringing someone in who was kind of the guy in Washington and now asking him to be the fourth guy to a bunch of guys who are much younger than him. He would be the oldest guy to get heavy minutes on this team by far. So I think those are some interesting things to consider here as well.
TP, give
Anything
us
else
some
on
pros.
Kuz?
I mean, honestly, the real pro, that was my other con, Jacob. It's just the usage. The usage and role is going to be very different than what he's been used to. Probably more similar to when he was like a rookie and a very young player in the league with the Lakers. And how willing is he to adapt to that? And also, even if he's not, maybe it's beneficial for the team offensively, but you're taking the ball out of J-Dub and Chet's hands specifically. I don't think you'll see a big drop off in Chase usage, but those other two players are two I'm really keeping an eye on.
For more reference there, he's taken between 13.5 and 15.5 shots per game 3 times in his career, twice in LA, once in Washington. First 2 times in LA was 13.5 shots, 16.1 points, 15.5 shots, 18.7 points. Then in Washington, 14.2 shots for 17.1 points. It's like he can score on lower volume. Like he's proven in 2 different situations to do so.
You asked for my pro, Nick, and essentially it's what you already said. It's just he's somebody who can get his shot when he needs to and provide more shot making and scoring. Also could potentially space the floor more for our playmakers and Shea and Dove specifically.
And he's a big body.
He is.
He's a big body. What does a trade package for Kyle Kuzma look like?
Yeah.
I mean, word on the streets, 2 first-round picks.
Okay, so let's say middle of the road, 2 first-round picks, and you just absorb the contract.
I think Dawkins would want a young player in return. And maybe that's where you have to give up Oos, potentially. That seems like a lot for Kuzma, in my opinion. But just knowing Dawkins and the phase that the Wizards are currently in, this rebuilding phase, I think they would want a young player, a potential prospect.
I think if it was Oos, it'd be Oos and a pretty bad first-round pick.
Yep.
Which like is a hard pill to swallow because Oos could be really damn good, but Oos may never be really damn good on this team.
Let's say Oos in a middle of the road first for Kyle Kuzma. This time we are going to rank it by your personal Pop-Tart preference.
Haven't had a Pop-Tart in a long time.
Same.
Yeah,
That's why I wanted to talk about Pop-Tarts.
Like it.
I think the only good flavor of Pop-Tart is 2, strawberry and brown sugar. So I guess neither of those because I don't love it.
So I
Okay.
have brown sugar at the top of my list. I also like cherry. So maybe cherry's middle of the road.
I'm going blueberry because I don't like blueberry very much. But I'm with you guys. Brown sugar, elite, S tier.
So
So good.
brown sugar is the best. We'll go cherry the middle and blueberry for the worst.
Oh, we're just gonna do 1,
Yeah,
2,
a
3.
scale.
The middle one, like I it would make sense. Like if you really don't think Oos is going to have a role in this team, and he's still a year or 2 away, I think you probably do it and see what happens. Kuz is the kind of guy that like could really elevate you in a lot of ways. Like if you stick Kyle Kuzma on this team instead of Gordon Hayward this year, you may beat the Mavs and you may be in the finals.
I would go between the cherry and the blueberry. It's not middle of the road and it's not horrible. I'm not a huge fan of it. That's just a personal preference. Folks in the chat saying s'mores is the best. The cookies and cream one is S tier. And Thunder Chick says the chemical chocolate is last. I think that's fair.
That is very fair.
Wildberry says Chef Maine.
Oh, I did like Wildberry. Forgot about that.
All right. Let's move on to our next guy. This time we are talking a free agent. Hey, executives around the league say the Thunder could be the team to lure this guy out of the Eastern Conference. We are talking OG Anunoby.
Hey, I could become a millionaire this offseason as well. I could.
6'7", 230 pound, about to be 27 years old in the middle of July. OG Anunoby this season, total, looking at his Toronto and his Knicks stats, played 50 games. He scored 14.7 points on 49% shooting. He shot 38% from 3 on 5 attempts a game. 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.5 steal. His career numbers from the field are 47%. Career numbers from 3 are 38% on 4.5 attempts a game. When we look at his advanced numbers just for the rebounding purposes, this season total, OG was a 10.6% defensive rebounding defensive rebounder, and on total rebounds he was 6.8. So not a great rebounding guy. His contract has expired. He will be, well, it hasn't expired. He's got a team or a player option that he's not going to pick up. He will be a unrestricted free agent this summer and is undoubtedly getting a max contract. Before we talk about the contract and all that, let's talk pros and cons on adding OG Anunoby to this team. The pros, he's a really damn good basketball player, and he's huge, and he can defend all over the place, and he can hit a spot up 3. If you want a filthy, disgusting defense, you slide OG Anunoby in at the 4 on this team. And it gets gross fast. The length, the versatility, the tenacity of this team would be ungodly. And he's a guy that is shooting the 3 ball well enough that if you kick out to him, he can catch and hit. Nick Jordan in the chat says he plays bigger than he is. He was guarding Embiid in the first round. He can do a little bit of everything for you.
One of the few players in this league that can actually guard 1 to 5. Like we like to throw that reference out there. He's one of the few that can.
He and Scotty being on the same team, being able to do that was kind of gross.
It was.
They didn't win games.
They couldn't build the right team around him.
Crazy scorer.
Yep.
Yeah, he's not a crazy scorer, and he's not a good rebounder, and he's not a great playmaker. He's a guy that's going to catch and shoot. He's a guy that can run in transition, but he doesn't check all of the Thunder's boxes offensively. That's kind of my quick spiel on OG. I'll let you guys take it over a little bit.
Worth noting, would be really surprising if he didn't resign in New York, given who his agent.
For what it's worth, his agent is the son of the New York GM.
Yep. If let's say that he did, I think that OG is awesome. I think if you're going to sign a guy to a max, there are other options that are better. Not necessarily free agency, even like guys you could trade for that are due for a max contract. Like Alari Markkanen, for example. I think OG should be on like the dream list for what it's worth. But Taylor, I like assuming Oklahoma City could sign OG for a max. Is he the guy? Because that's basically like that's your big move, your last piece. You're gonna do fringe stuff for the rest of this era of Thunder basketball, probably, because you're gonna have 4 guys on max or near max deals. Like, is OG the guy? Because that's what it comes down to. Right.
And I think that's the key, is we talked, and we'll get into his contract here as well, what he potentially could get most likely from the Knicks. It would have to be something that's flexible for both OG, where he could get that money that he's looking for, but also allows you the future flexibility, like you alluded to, Nick, especially with J-Dub and Chet coming up, and Shea being eligible for a new max extension as well. But again, the offensive fit, you guys mentioned he's not really a playmaker, isn't a great rebounder, but at the same time, I mean, he's so great at all the other things. 40% on catch and shoot threes, especially like we keep talking about the perfect fit around Shea, Chet, J-Dub. I mean, you don't need him to do much more. You have so many creators already, and more creators coming off the bench for this team. So I love the offensive fit. But like so many people in the chat are alluding to, my biggest con, Jacob, it's extremely unlikely to happen. Like you mentioned, not only is his I guess GM or his president of basketball ops, Leon Rose's son is his manager, his agent. But I don't think the Knicks make that trade if they weren't very, very confident that he was going to re-sign with them already. I think the rumors you hear, all the stuff being floated out there, is nothing more than just trying to get the most from the Knicks, and the Thunder being used as leverage currently. So maybe that's a good transition into what would a contract look like for OG, whether it's the Knicks this offseason or if the Thunder were to throw out some offer sheet to him. What would that look like? You're muted.
The contract's a max. It's 100% a max. And the other con, and I was gone for a second, so I don't know if you guys mentioned this. This season, he played 50 games. Last season, 67. Before that, 48. Before that, 43. Availability. He's
exactly. There. The injury history. And again, we saw the pros that we described here, what he would look like on this Thunder team. We saw those pros when he was traded to the Knicks. They were incredible after that trade, but he wasn't available for very long.
Yep.
And was hindered in the playoffs when it mattered most.
We don't have to do a scale on this one, Taylor. I don't think it would happen. And the cost of it and how long you have to give him a contract for based off the availability, I just don't think it's the fit for OKC.
Agreed. And then, so just some context, the Knicks can sign Anunoby to a max deal of 5 years, $245 million. I recently read somewhere that maybe $35 million a year is in the ballpark of maybe beneficial for both him, that he would accept, but also not completely maxing him out. That's a lot of money to pay him if you're the Thunder.
Agreed. All right, let's go on to our last guy on the list before we hit some wild cards. He is a Brooklyn Net, former Phoenix Sun, Cameron Johnson. Cam Johnson is just turned 28 back in March, a 28-year-old, 6'8", 210-pound wing. This season with the Brooklyn Nets, he played 58 games. He was injured a bit. Scored 13.5 points on 45% shooting. Shot 39% on 6.1 threes per game. 4.3 rebounds, 2.5 assists, nearly a steal a game. For his career, he is a 39% three-point shooter on 5.7 attempts per game. So this season was pretty on average for him. When you look at the advanced rebounding numbers, this season he was a 13.8% defensive rebounder and an 8.6% total rebounder. Those are pretty well in line with his career numbers. He is under contract. Next season, he makes $23.6 million. The year after that, $21.5 million. the year after that, back up to that 23.6 again. Pros and cons about Cam Johnson. What do you guys got?
You really touched on the pros that I had. I mean, he's an elite shooter on high attempts, 39% from 3 this season on 6 attempts, with not a lot of great creators around him. 42%.
He's not getting
catch and
left
shoot
open in the
threes.
playoffs.
Exactly. And Nick, you mentioned with Kyle Kuzma, we were talking about him and how those shot attempts would be much easier for Kuzma playing on a team like the Thunder. The same could be said about Cam Johnson. And I can only imagine what that would look like with the ball movement and spacing that OKC can provide. It could be pretty elite and pretty dangerous. Obviously, those 3-point attempts probably go down just a little bit due to opportunity, but he's also not a guy like we talked about with Kuzma who's going to have the ball in his hands, trying to create, taking away possessions from the J-Dubs and the Chets. Really just a perfect match offensively. Maybe a con. And do you guys have any other pros?
Well, I was just going to read off another stat for you real quick. In 38 total playoff games in his career, he is a 41.6% 3-point shooter, averaged 10, 3.5, 1.5 on 24 minutes a game.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I think he'd play the 4 at Oklahoma City. I think a lot of the deficiencies we saw this season would still be pretty prevalent. Him playing against the Chet, that's not like the beefy 4 we always talk about. Because I don't know if his 6 3-point attempts go down. I almost wonder if it's like more of a distribution. I think he's 6 3-point attempts and 4 2s a game, Jacob? Would he take 10 shots a game?
Let me get that for you real quick here. Field goal attempts 10.7 this year. 3-point attempts 6.1. So yeah, about 6
60%.
threes a game and 4 2s a game.
Yeah, I think he could still take 10 or 12 shots a game, but I think it's like, bro, you're taking 8 or 9 threes and just cooking out there. So I don't know. Like I think he
gets me excited.
He could do a lot for this team. He's 6'8". I think he's a defender that would fit really well in the system, but he's not necessarily the guy that I think a lot of people envision next to Chet. Like he's really more of like a 3 that's 6'8", has some size to him, both physically and height wise. I don't know. Like I think he'd be awesome in Oklahoma City. I don't think he's like the Thanos Infinity Stone per se. I think you need to sign him and somebody else if you're going to be the champion next season. Not that has to be the goal next year, but if that was your goal next year.
I think that's the case with a lot of targets we're talking about tonight. Like you said, the Infinity Stone, that's probably what we're going to touch on in Sunday's podcast.
I kind of like the fit. I find it interesting. I don't know if the Thunder are the team that goes out and does this, but I do think it's an interesting fit because he just shoots the piss out of the ball.
Yeah.
Adds a little bit of size. I just don't know if he gives you enough elsewhere that you want. The defense, the bulkiness, the rebounding, those are the places that it's a give and take.
Yeah. And
right, it's definitely a give and take.
The good thing is like Brooklyn wants draft capital. I don't think 12 is like the sexiest pick in a draft like this, and I don't think 12 gets him outright either. But like, if you have a lottery pick in this draft, you can offer like, hey, you can get a guy this draft, and then here's a couple more picks in the future, like another guy. Like, I think having a 24 pick, and there's a lot of teams trying to trade out of the lottery. So you could say this about a lot of teams, but I think Brooklyn would be enticed by a pick in this draft in the lottery.
I think that's fair.
It's very interesting. So you say like pick 12 and then another middle of the road first rounder, Nick?
No, I think it'd take more than that. I think it would take 12, a middle of the road first rounder.
So lotto protected?
Or just like a Miami pick. Like Miami's not gonna be bad ever.
Yeah.
And then maybe like Wiggins. Like he's not gonna come. He's not gonna come cheap. Like that's like
right.
All of us on this pod and all of our listeners are like, just give him the picks. It's like you're gonna to become a better team and get the guys we're talking about on this pod and especially on Sunday's pod. You have to give up players that you have an affinity to. So like, If you want Cam Johnson, you may have to give up Aaron Wiggins. If you want Lauri Markkanen, you may have to give up like guys you love. Like it's just part of it.
Yep. So if that's the deal, 12, the Miami pick, and Aaron Wiggins. If that's the trade that comes through, do you like it, love it, or hate it?
Love it.
I love it. I'd be excited.
I'm going to go like it. I'm tempering. Let's take a quick break. On the other side, we will do our spark of the week and then do our 3 wild cards. We will be right back. And we are back. I'll tell you about Spark. Spark joy at Oklahoma's family-friendly joint, Spark. Located in Scissortail Park, recently opened in Chisholm Creek, and opening in mid-June on the 17th in Nichols Hills. Dive into their menu of burgers, bites, and cold delights, and don't skip the must-try BLC burger, pink fries, frozen peach club special, and rotating custard flavor of the month. And we can't forget to mention their newest menu item, the Rumble Fries. This tray of loaded fries are perfect to share for the whole table, named after none other than Rumble the Bison himself. Gentlemen, when we're talking spark of the week this week, and we're talking wings, we've talked a lot of skill sets that a wing needs. What is the one skill that a wing could bring to this team next season that would spark them to even greater success?
Let's do play finishing. I thought Oklahoma City did a lot of play finishing this year from their wings. I think that was like what their wings kind of were. Like they weren't outside of the starters, they weren't really creators. They were more play finishers. In the playoffs, they weren't really play finishers. I think in the playoffs, you see like the team like the Mavs, for example. Jaden Hardy, PJ Washington, Josh Green, Derrick Jones Jr. Like they're not like Hardy's a little bit different because that dude thinks he's Kobe. Take him out of the equation. A lot of those guys are just like hitting shots open and like making the play when they get just like facilitated for. That's an underrated skill. Like play making is great, and Oklahoma City needs more of it. Play finishing is tremendous. So I think that's Cam Johnson that like if you leave him open, you're going to pay. That's something in the playoffs that is super valuable.
I'm going to go similar to yours, but a little even more simplified. 3-point shooting. I think the play finishing is important. Finishing a play by catching and shooting a ball is good. But I think even more than the ability to finish inside is they just need somebody who can space the floor for them and open it up a little bit more to where teams cannot cheat off.
3-point shooting was going to be mine as well. So I'll
Sorry.
take the... No, you're good. There's another one that I think is equal and already has been put up here in the chat from our guy Gregory. Mentioned the rebounding. And like we said, it doesn't necessarily have to come from a wing. If that's the avenue that the Thunder use this offseason to improve the team, you can hopefully find the rebounding elsewhere. But primarily, if we're talking about a player who could potentially be a starter for this team and will play like big time minutes, they've got to be able to rebound the ball.
I like it. All right. That's all for Spark of the Week. Let's now talk our 3 wild cards. So we talked to 4 players: Patrick Williams, Kyle Kuzma, OG Anunoby, and Cam Johnson.
Yep.
Now we all 3 get to pick a player to talk about for just a few minutes on why we like the fit. It has to be a relatively realistic, attainable guy. You can't go LeBron James here.
Yep. I'll go first. I'm a big query guy. Like I like to think about the traits or the statistics I like in a player and query to players that meet the criteria. When I think about a wing, they have to be able to score, not like be a 20-point per game kind of night guy. So I put a filter on 12.5 points a game for starters. From there, I think a wing for this team needs to be able to shoot, not lights out. Cam Johnson, for example, who's a great shooter, is only 39% on his career. So I put a 35% or better 3-point filter. I think in this league and in Oklahoma City, you have to be able to pass. You don't have to be a 5 assist a night kind of guy, but I put a 1.5 assist filter. So 12.5 points a game, 35% 3-point shooter, 1.5 or more assists. That brought up roughly 84 players based on the forward category on NBA.com. That category is kind of bogus because players like Embiid and Jalen Brunson both show up in the forward category, which makes no sense. So let's say maybe like 50 guys actually meet the mark. One of the guys that sticks out from this list, and that 50 guys that meet that criteria is actually a pretty low number, is DeAndre Hunter out of Atlanta. I know he's got his own injury concerns. He's got his own big contract. Not the best rebounder ever, but I think he does a lot of things that are super interesting for Oklahoma City. I'll give you guys a quick stat rundown since Jacob did that for all the guys we talked about. DeAndre Hunter last season, I guess biometrics wise, he is a 6'8", 225-pound combo forward, can play both the 3 and the 4. He's entering his sixth season in the league. Last year, he shot 38.5% from 3 on over 5 attempts, averaged 15.5 points, 4 boards, an assist and a half, 1 stock.
How many
less
games?
than 30 minutes a game, played 57 games. He's never played more than 70 in his career.
And what's his age?
He is 26.
It's actually older than I thought, surprisingly.
What's the contract look like?
He just signed a new one recently. Let me pull it up for you. He signed a 490, so 22 and a half.
That's not
so
terrible.
kind of in line with Kuz.
Yeah, that's not terrible.
Not terrible.
The injury concerns scare me a little bit, but the fit, I can see it.
So here's a question. Him or assuming Pat Will is a 490, would you rather have him or Pat Will? They're 4 years apart, but I think DeAndre's got a hell of a lot more to prove in the league. Like he's done a hell of a lot more in the league.
That's fair. Man, I don't know. I kind of lean the youth of Pat Will, but that's an interesting case study, Nick.
Mm-hmm.
I almost just give Pat Will the benefit of the doubt because of the youth.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, do you draft that Usman Jang or do you draft the guy that you know is going to help you? And at some point, this Thunder team's going to have to go help me today.
Yep. Interesting. Taylor, who's your guy?
So my guy is someone, when I kind of struggled with this, just trying to think of players who were actually going to be available and not one of the like pipe dream scenarios that we'll get into on Sunday. This is a player that I kind of thought about over the past couple of seasons. He's had great contribution for his team as they've kind of gone through a weird period where they weren't really contenders, but they weren't rebuilding. Now they are rebuilding, and I think he's more gettable. He had a Team USA appearance. The guy I'm talking about is Keldon Johnson for the Spurs. The reports coming out of the Spurs this offseason is that everybody not named Wemby or Devin Vassell would be awesome on this team. But everybody not named Wemby or Vassell are potentially gettable. He's only 6'5", but he plays much bigger than he is. He averaged almost 16 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 2.8 assists this season on 45% from the floor, only 34.6% from 3, 36% on catch and shoot 3 specifically. Not great from the corners, but he's very solid in the restricted area. He's someone who's great at finishing around the rim and is very explosive. You see a lot of those fun, explosive dunks, and he's able to finish around the rim. And I think he's really solid off ball and cutting. Kind of fits the mold that Nick alluded to earlier when we were talking about players like the Aaron Wiggins and Kenrich Williams. I think Keldon Johnson kind of fits into that mold, even if he's not great or necessarily elite from the 3-point line. The other thing is he can bow down low defensively. He's really strong, but he's never going to be a rim protector. So that's kind of a con, right? Like playing alongside Chet, it's not necessarily the ideal forward to match alongside him, but still a player who's very talented and can be really fun and contribute to this team. I went ahead and pulled up his contract while you guys were talking about DeAndre Hunter's contract. He just, 4 years, $74 million. So it's not very expensive.
Ludor contract.
Yeah. So it's a very favorable contract. He'll be an unrestricted free agent in 2027, 2028. And that contract declines. This next year, he's up for like 19 million and then 17.5 in 25, 26, and then the subsequent season as well at that 17.5 mark. So pretty team-friendly contract. Obviously a salary that you can use in potential trades moving forward, but somebody I think that could impact this team immediately and fit a needed role.
Interesting. I appreciate all you said. I'm out.
Me too. How many 6'5" guys that play bigger than they are can you have on a team before no one's actually big?
It's fair. I got a big for you. A big wing.
A big?
A big wing. How does 6'9", 210 pounds sound?
Oh, God. You were saving it for the end, weren't you?
23 years old.
There he is. Does he look like me?
A great contract that is declining over the next 4 years. 15.6, 14.3, 13.1, 11.8 in a cap environment that is going to spike. A gentleman that averaged 15 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal a game, shooting 37% from 3. Has solid rebounding numbers, a defensive rebounding percentage of 22.1 and a total rebound percent at 13. He's a young guy. You guys already know. It's the Avdia agenda over here, folks. I just can't shake that. I think the fit is so good.
Surprised you didn't save him for Dream.
I think as far as Dream goes, like, I think he's more gettable than some of the guys we would talk about. I think this would cost you Giddey in 12.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about that on a love it, like it, hate it scale, Jacob?
So it's like love it, like it, hate it.
You got the meter going.
Oh, Denny. It's broken the scale. It's doing flips.
Which direction?
The good direction.
Oh. So if you found out it was Cody Williams and Josh Giddey for him, you're loving that to the next level.
I'm committed to the bit, Nick.
It's so easy to trade pick 12 and then all of a
Until
sudden it's
you
an actual
think who it
human
is.
being that you've covered or followed in the draft cycle or like him as a prospect, and it changes everything.
Thunder Chick in the chat says he's brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tart, toasted to perfection with a cold glass of milk next to it on a
Milk
nice
and
spring morning.
Pop-Tarts?
Yeah. What are you drinking?
What?
Water?
I've seen people do that.
Ugh.
Some orange juice?
Mm. I think I had Pop-Tarts
Nick's-
since I was like 6, so I
It's
don't
just
know.
going dry.
Oh.
Man, do what
All
you gotta
right.
do, Nick.
All right.
But ladies and gentlemen, I think that'll do it for the show tonight. Leave a comment. Let us know which of the 7 names we dropped that you liked the most, or if it's somebody that wasn't the 7 but is realistic, you can comment them too. And come back Sunday as we talk our dream scenario trades. That's the big names, folks. Those are the ones you guys are waiting for. Smoot reminds me there is a super chat from Phantom TV. It says, I hope we trade Giddey for Robert Williams. Phantom TV later said that he sent this super chat while driving, and that's why there are spelling errors. Brother, I hope you didn't get in a wreck.
He made it
Robert
safely.
Williams.
He said it was
Robert
while he was
Williams.
driving.
If his knees aren't barbecue
Jell-O?
chicken, would be
Yeah.
incredible in OKC.
Shredded barbecue chicken.
Yeah. That's
Pulled
a
barbecue chicken.
real problem.
Yeah.
And the injury history is very concerning. But hypothetically, it's a fun fit.
Yeah.
He is interesting.
He's great.
You guys have a great rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend. We will be back Sunday night as always. Join us here 9 p.m. Central Time. I feel like I typically have more to say. I don't. Bye.
It's the off season.